All right, friends, we are here again. We seem to be back, and we will proceed to look at the second initiation as DK describes it. I'm not sure how much we get done of it today. Maybe in fact we won't pass the second initiation today. Maybe we might have to wait for some months. It's a sad thing. That's it. Ray 2, that's right. When you could be forging ahead with the first ray, instead the second ray is pulling you back into reality. Okay. This is, we remember that there were three words, don't we, ladies? Remember that there were three words that connected with the second initiation given to us, and they were, do you remember? Dedication, these were the three words that were operative with the there are two places actually where he discusses the initiations. We're only doing one right now. I'm not sure that he will get into these words in this particular section. Let's see. Maybe we should also review the requirements for the second initiation. Do you remember what they were? I mean, before I actually go to the page. First of all, the requirements for the first initiation were basically love of one's fellow man, the interest in the esoteric or spiritual, or let's define it as some sort of uplifting teaching that verges towards the soul. He says esoteric teaching. Then the third one was, do you remember? Disciplining the life, right, towards some sort of greater beauty of life, discipline, right? And then he says, when you add to that what do you have to add to that? The urge to know, didn't he say? To study and to know? Let's see. Study and know, yes, something like that. People know themselves as a group. Let's see if I can do this with second and first, second initiation and first characteristics. Here it is. They should assume that all those who truly love their fellow men, who are interested in the esoteric teaching, but we need to, I think, not have a very narrow view of what esoteric teaching means there, and who seek to discipline themselves in order to attain greater beauty of life, are initiate and have undergone the first initiation. When they discover those who are seeking mental polarization and who evidence a desire and aspiration to think and to know, coupled with the distinguishing marks of those who have taken the first initiation, because simply to be a mental being and to think and know might not be enough, then they can in all probability safely assume that the people have taken the second initiation or are on the verge of doing so. So that's an important, from Ray's End, initiation 667. That's an important one. The initiatory process between the first initiation of the birth of the Christ and the beginning of the conscious unfoldment of the Christ life and awareness, the life of the initiate has undergone a pronounced reorientation. So in this initiatory process, the initiatory process actually operates between these initiations. The life of the initiate has now undergone a pronounced reorientation. I think I'll make this just a little bigger. Might help just a tiny bit. And right. He is now capable of an equally pronounced and often fanatical adherence to the program of aspiration and of devotion to the good as he sees it. So obviously the sixth ray is coming into focus, and you begin to wonder whether you would not see during this period, if you were to look at the various lives, more of the sixth ray personality emerging, if you were not a sixth ray soul, that is, than at other times. So an often fanatical adherence to the program of aspiration and of devotion to the good. Now in this case, devotion seems to be coming early. Dedication is the first word, but maybe he'll discuss this. Maybe it's in another place. This is symbolized for us in the story of the 12-year-old Jesus, who was so conscious that he must be about his Father's business that he defied his parents, caused them distress, and astonished those older than he by his spiritual poise and knowledge. So he was so committed to being about his Father's business. But of course, elsewhere DK explains this as the actual influence of the monad that was coming in at that time. In the case of Master Jesus, it's difficult to know exactly what is the monadic ray. You wonder sometimes whether it's not the first, just like Muhammad, his student, because he is the, Joshua the general, and even now DK describes him as a very martial or Martian figure, a commanding general with piercing eyes. Doesn't exactly sound like the second ray on some fundamental level. The same with St. Paul, the first ray monad, and that's for sure. Or at least the implications are very, very strong that Master Hilarion, even though his sub-monadic ray may be the fifth, of which he is the head, that if we finally resolve this, we're going to find a first ray monad there, I believe. That he defied his parents and caused them distress. Well, I guess the adolescents among us, and we, when we are in an adolescent stage, we cause distress to our elders. This he offset by going down to Galilee and being subservient to his parents. And this must have been in at some point during the period between 12 years and 30 years. A somewhat similar attitude, without the developed and inclusive understanding manifested by the Christ, can be seen expressing itself in the disciple during the period wherein the new orientation is taking place. A somewhat similar attitude. Okay, so the disciple is also very much one-pointed. That's interesting that Sagittarius rules the first degree and the second degree. It says Sagittarius initiates of the first and second degree, with their one-pointed six-ray attitude. The period wherein the new orientation is taking place, the disciple is learning to discipline his lower nature. Remember, he already began that discipline at the first degree. He shows that he is disciplining his life for greater beauty of life. He's learning to discipline his lower nature and to achieve a measure of mastery over his physical inclinations. In a way, he had to have started his mastery of the instinctual nature even at the first initiation, which is a very, in a way, physical incarnation. He thus releases physical energy and brings order into his life. In other words, if he's not always spending his energy on physical inclinations, energy is released for other purposes. And some degree of order from the seventh ray rulership of the first initiation is coming into the life. Adherence to rules, disciplines, regulations, ways of being, rituals. This takes a very long time and may cover a cycle of many initiations. The Master Jesus has that analogy. He was born, and then at 30, the birth is his birth, symbolically, and then at 30, he takes the initiation in the Jordan, he takes the baptism. Of course, that's all being enacted. It's not really. He was a second-degree initiate long ago, and the Christ long ago. But this is enacted for us. And there's a huge span of time between birth and the years 30, considering that he took the next three initiations, 2, 3, and 4, by the time he was 33 years old. At least that's the story, that he was crucified at the age of 33. Whether that is a symbolic or actual, that must be one day determined. He is constantly fighting against his lower nature and the requirements of his soul, as he sometimes ignorantly interprets them, are in constant session. That means constant battle against the animal nature, and increasingly in relation to the emotional nature. So this is a period between the first and second initiation, a period of conflict. So, you know, the sixth ray can be strong, the fourth ray can be strong, seventh ray strong, not so much perhaps the fifth ray yet, but by the time we get to the third initiation, the fifth ray will be very necessary. I'm sorry for the slight break here. Okay. Is there any reason why someone should not be able to hear something? Wait a second. You hear me, right? Okay, you hear me. I'm on the microphone, and you hear me, Anne. Okay. So I don't know. I just received a call from someone who couldn't hear me. So that must be a local condition, because we're broadcasting right here, and apparently my words are being picked up. So I don't know what else I can do. Well, anyway, check. I would recommend to any person who's not hearing me that they check the volume level on their own computer, because sometimes when the computer is the volume level is turned down accidentally or somehow on mute, if they may have muted themselves on the GoToWebinar program and not realize it, or the volume level may be down so low on the computer that it's not possible. So that's all I can say for the moment. Anne is checking, and she does hear me. Okay. So anyway, there's a battle going on at this time between the soul and the lower nature. And you can say, well, look, was St. Paul a second-degree initiate? Well, he was certainly a fanatical individual, extremely one-pointed. Sometimes I think, when I think of St. Paul, that his soul ray was really the sixth, and that he transferred onto the second ray at some point when he began to write about the nature of love. But really, his hierarchical function came in when the fifth ray monad made its presence felt, which would be, I guess, beginning at the third initiation, because there's such a tremendous light in the fifth ray that he was blinded. So probably the monadic ray was coming in there, and we know the story how the fifth ray tends to resolve upon the first ray. So I believe his monadic ray and his final or major monadic ray is the fifth and first. So anyway, there's a battle going on here, and probably the majority of people that we know who are on the spiritual path are somewhere in this long process. Probably in one respect, the door is left behind them. They stand on the other side of the door of the first initiation, by and large. Especially if they are really adhering to this kind of material, which requires so much persistence and so much sacrifice of normal life process in order to study and to apply. So somewhere in between the first and second, we are likely to find ourselves with the possibility of really entering the stream at the second degree and moving fast. I think Alice Bailey came in as a second degree initiate. This is my impression. And that somehow, you know, she was a fanatical preacher, interestingly enough. Her rays ended up being the second ray astral body and the second ray soul, but I wouldn't at all be surprised if she had a sixth ray astral body when she first began this life. Probably somewhere in the process, as the love energy of the third degree became so strong, just like it did for St. Paul, probably the astral body made a transition more onto the second ray, which when the Tibetan gave her her rays later, was the second ray astral body. So her rays were 2-1, 1-2-7. Those were Alice Bailey's rays. Okay. Above all, he becomes aware of a secondary relation. This is the initiate, the probationary initiate between the first and second degree. He becomes aware of a secondary relation involving a most difficult problem and one which enhances the fight and intensifies his problem. You know, in a way, you could say this is a very Martian period. Not Marian. A very Martian period. He discovers that his emotional nature, his lower psychic faculties, his astral development, and the potency of glamour are now all arrayed against him. This is a military term, and it means to be in organized opposition. So all of these are like standing as his enemy, and here he is as the disciple, and he has to deal with this kind of emotional sensitivity and psychic sense and so forth. The reorientation with which he is now faced has to be brought about primarily upon the astral train, yes. The astral, I'm slurring my words. I think something, pretty soon I'll be channeling, so just, you know, take notes. All right. The reorientation with which he is now faced has to be brought about primarily upon the astral plane, because that has been for untold eons the level of his major polarization. When does a mental polarization actually occur? When does it actually? Between the second and third initiation, more or less, let me say midway, or let's just say when you have demonstrated your ability to move beyond the temptations in the desert, then it can be said that your mind is being infused by the soul in quite a strong way, that you can achieve the mind held steady in the light. And it's not just that you're a mental being, but you have a focus in the soul-illumined mind. And this we call mental polarization, at least in occult terms. For untold eons, however, he's been an emotional being, maybe ever since he was opening second petal. Well, you know, there are also periods when you go through a strictly mental period, but once he enters the love petal period, there will be, again, a reassertion of emotional polarization, even though he will have a mind with which to work. That mind has largely been developed in the third petal processes, which I have associated with Virgo. Well, we did a big thing on all the astrology of the egoic lotus, but you may remember that when one of the ways we looked at the first three petals was first petal Capricorn, second petal Taurus, third petal Virgo. The mental processes are coming alive. We also said Aries, Taurus, Gemini. In either case, a Mercury sign ends up on that third petal, which is the sacrifice petal. And for that reason, the more mental type of individual may be developed, but so much depends upon the soul ray. You know, these people that came from Vulcan, and have only 2 petals open, they probably have an awful lot of fifth ray, connecting them to the mineral kingdom and subduing their emotional response. So we can't say that all people going through the hall of ignorance and working on the first 3 petals will reach petal 3 and be purely mental beings. The Vulcanians, yes, and maybe the Mercurians, yes, but others from Venus and Jupiter, lotuses from Venus and Jupiter, will probably keep their rather 2-4-6 line orientation. So anyway, he says, for untold eons, an eon is a very indeterminate word. Sometimes an eon means an entire round. Sometimes an eon might mean a root race, or it might simply mean untold personality cycles or soul cycles. It's a term that he seems to apply simply to a long period of time. And there's no way to pin him down on this. But, the longest stretch that I've seen for an eon is a kind of a manvantara, or a round. For untold eons, the level of his major polarization and the sphere of activity and the state of consciousness which has dominated him. After all, we have been Atlanteans for a very long time, and we still have many, many Atlanteans among us. And the beginning of the Atlantean root race was 12 million years ago. So if you look at it, the real beginning of the Aryan root race was 1 million years ago. That's 11 million years as an Atlantean. Unless, of course, you came from the moon chain, in which case you would have entered Atlantis in its 3rd subdivision, 4 sub 3, which would have been some millions of years later. Perhaps somewhere around 6 or 5 million years later, 5 million years ago. The physical body is not a principle. His etheric body has, since Atlantean days, been the agent of astral energy, and that's why HPB called the emotional body astral, even though the term astral really pertains to the etheric body. But since the etheric body, for so many, was carrying so much astral energy, she blended the terms, and it's caused some confusion, because DK tells us that the emotional body is not really star-like at all. Maybe the etheric body is star-like, shining, glittering, but not the astral body. It is actually, fairly, the astral plane anyway, fairly foggy, glamour-ridden, dense, not shining at the present time. So his etheric body has been, since Atlantean days, the agent of astral energy, for the mind nature is not yet developed. Therefore, it has not adequately taken control. He discovers that he lives in a chaos of emotional reactions and of conditioning glamours. Alignment, crisis, light, revelation, integration. He goes through a period of light. The soul light is shining in upon his personal nature, and he says, oh my goodness, look at me. I mean, this is a mess. And he begins to develop that spiritual inferiority complex because he finally sees himself clearly, which has not been the case. He's just been acting and reacting in all of this mess. And it's especially tough on the second ray types. They tend to be very hard on themselves, very vulnerable to self-criticism. So somewhere between the first and second initiation, he's really dealing with glamour quite a bit, and he sees that he lives in a chaos of uncontrolled emotional responses and conditioning glamours, which are simply wrong emotional orientations, wrong desires, exaggerations, minimizations, distortions. That's what glamours are. They prevent you from seeing things as they are. You put such an emphasis on a particular bias or orientation that you fail to see the truth. The glamour hides the truth. He slowly begins to realize that in order to take the second initiation, he must demonstrate emotional control. And sometimes, of course, the arts are very useful in helping the individual to get a hold of his emotions as he sublimates those emotions into creative forms. So it's a lot better, you know, there's some discipline in it, there's some creative imagination in it rather than just reacting to everything, see? So the artistic phase at this point is very useful in getting the emotional body under control, because in art you're not out to let your emotions run rampant. You have to have some monitor. I'm thinking of acting, singing, dancing, the proper kind of painting, let's say. Yeah, the same way with poetry. You have to control it. It may be filled with marvelous emotional, evocative qualities, but unless the mind is involved, you will not achieve your effect. So the arts are very good in this respect, in helping to gain emotional control. He realizes also that he must have some knowledge of those spiritual energies which will dissipate glamour. Okay, and that's particularly the beam from the Ajna center along the fifth ray line, the clear thinking, plus an understanding of the technique whereby illumination from the mind, as the transmitting agent of the soul, can dispel these glamours and thus clarify the atmosphere in a technical sense. In other words, he lives in fogs, he lives in mists. You know how it is in the morning before the sun comes out. Sometimes you go out there and the mist and the fog is hanging over the land. And then the analogy is right. When the sun comes out, the rays of the sun lift the fog. And thus it is with the illumined mind, in this case, lifting the fog. I'm sure that a lot of us feel in our life a lot clearer than we felt 30 or 40 years ago, or don't we? Don't you think? Some say no. Well, you know, I guess try to judge the degree of your reactivity, or, you know, rapid instinctual emotional response, unregulated by thought or by soul perspective. I would think that by the time you reach 50 or 60 or, you know, 70 or whatever, this should be a little more in control than when you're 20. Are there any objections to this thought? I'm sure we all have our moments. But obviously, you know, the old saying, please, more light and less heat. And this is not the heat we've been talking about, which is equivalent to spiritual energy. This is just good old Martian reactivity where the air turns blue, you know. Anyway, clarifying the atmosphere, and DK does talk about the clearing process and saying it takes quite a long time, and frequently people have to clear and re-clear. And sometimes when you are working with a therapist, and a number of you have been therapists and are therapists, people use their session with you to come and clear. You are the clear beam of rational, loving light, and you are shining upon their particular problems, and because they work with you, you help them see more clearly where they do not see clearly. So it's a clearing process, very much before the second initiation. Yes? Oh, well, I'm not being entirely specific, you know, referring to a particular type of meditation. You know, I'm thinking sometimes of Albert Ellis, who was a psychologist back in the 70s and 60s and so forth, and he had a type of therapy called rational cognitive therapy. And he was obviously a heavy fifth ray type, interested in psychology, and he would help people think very clearly about the causes of their emotional distress. So it was just more or less of a process, not necessarily a meditation, but more an orientation. And what I'm trying to say is that your average good psychologist or psychotherapist has seen a lot of stress and difficulty in their own life and in the lives of other people. So they have a certain clear understanding of causes of situations. And they help, whether through meditation, which I'm not saying only that, or just through conversation and dialogue, they help the other person see clearly. Have any of you yet seen the new movie about Freud and Jung called A Dangerous Method? It's all about the birth of psychoanalysis, and it's the way that Carl Jung discovered psychoanalysis and began to use it. It's basically what they called it the talking method. So somehow there would be this dialogue, and in the process of the dialogue, much would be clarified for the distressed individual. It's all about a woman who was in a terrible condition with various obsessions and all that, and how her therapy went. I forget her name now, and how she later became one of the great psychoanalysts and trainer of psychoanalysts. So it's brilliant, you know. It's Michael Fassbender and Viggo Mortensen and Keira Knightley, who's turning out to be quite a fantastic actress. Those three are in this movie called A Dangerous Method. And it's fascinating she had some kind of incredible sexual obsessions, and, well, you know, they found a way through. Of course, Carl Jung had his first affair with her. It's not exactly what goes with psychotherapy, but it seemed to work. And it left her in a much better condition, and then she began to develop on her own a wonderful system, which somehow took from both Freud and Jung. I would recommend it. A dangerous method. A dangerous method, meaning the new method of psychoanalysis, which at the time, you know, people were horrified because, you know, Freud, who had a lot of Taurus and Scorpio and seventh ray and first ray, you know that DK has equated psychoanalysis with the seventh ray. There was a lady who had a seventh ray personality and a seventh ray soul, and he says, and your seventh ray is the reason for your interest in psychoanalysis. She was also Sun in Scorpio, just like, well, Freud had Scorpio rising. You know, when I looked at their horoscopes, of course, many people have done this, but here's Freud on the Taurus-Scorpio axis, and here is Jung on the Leo-Aquarius axis. They were exactly crossed to each other. And even though they began quite friendly, there was later a parting of the ways when Carl Jung began to realize that the psyche was a whole lot bigger than Freud was giving the impression. Freud was, you know, very sexually obsessed, and for Jung, who was interested in alchemy and mythology and the various initiatory traditions and astrology, okay? Jung was like this. He had this incredible Aquarian view of things. And Freud was just fixated only on the basement of life, as Assagioli called it. As a matter of fact, there was this discussion of a conversation between Freud and Assagioli. So, and Freud is saying, Dr. Assagioli, I'm interested in the basement of life, you know, the basement. And what about you? You know, so Assagioli answers him something like this. Well, Dr. Freud, yes, I am interested in the basement, and I'm also interested in the living room and the upstairs of the house, and also the sunny sunroof on top of the house. I thought that was quite, you know, because obviously he developed spiritual psychosynthesis, which is something that Freud would simply say, well, that's some sort of compensation. It's not reality, you know. I might express, so anyway, between the first and second initiation, clarifying the atmosphere, getting clear, or as we all often say, you know, I am in need of a clearing. And have you ever sat down with yourself in a state of distress and cleared yourself, as it were. You know what I mean? I mean, things are, not under control, and you're not feeling in harmony, and you sit down with yourself and you try to see what's really happening here. What is the cause of this? And, everyone, I think, has their own methods of doing this. It might just be at first, okay, I'm going to meditate. On the other hand, it might really be a clear fifth ray analysis of what's going on first. See, and then you can bring in the higher soul energies. DK says there's three kinds of psychology: Lemurian, Atlantean, and Aryan psychology. So Lemurian psychology does deal with the basement of life. Atlantean psychology deals with productive activity. I'm just generalizing, getting the people engaged in an intelligent way in their society, sort of love pedals, you might say. Aryan psychology deals with flooding the personality with soul energy. No doubt after much is understood, of course. So, we want to be practicing Aryan psychology, even the psychology that is in a way post-Aryan, meaning, not just rational, but definitely bringing in the higher energies. I think you could say that there's a new type of psychology for those who are working on the sixth sub-race of the fifth root race. And that is bringing in the intuition and the abstract mind, and definitely the higher mental plane. I might emphasize that as yet, no initiate demonstrates complete control during the intermediate period between any initiation and the next higher initiation. And that would mean the third degree initiate demonstrates fluctuating intuition. The second degree initiate demonstrates fluctuating mental control. The first degree initiate has only periods of passing emotional control. He's not yet there. The intermediate period is regarded as a cycle of perfecting. So there's a fourth ray there with all of the vicissitudes. It's a bridge between two different things. That which is being left behind and subordinated to the higher realization is slowly dominated by the energies which are to be released into the consciousness of the initiate at the initiation for which he is being prepared. I think that's pretty clear. And it's like that now. It's this way with initiations, but can't we make the analogy with chakras also? Can we not? Suppose we are transferring our energy from the sacral center to the throat, and the issue is procreativity or creativity. It's not going to be either one or the other in the intermediate stage. Suppose we are transferring from the solar plexus to the heart. What would you say? What is our issue? A little louder. Well, there's the solar plexus and the heart, and we're kind of fluctuating between, and it's basically desire and it's emotion and love, or desire and love. See, so it's not one thing or another. The person is not totally stabilized. At the second degree, there's got to be a lot of love energy that floods the astral body, and a lot of the Martian desires are overcome. But in the interim period, it's not that. Okay, so the energies being left behind are slowly dominated by the energies which are to be released into the consciousness of the initiate at the initiation. So at initiation, energies are released into consciousness, but he has to prove that he is there and somewhat equal to those energies, because it's more a confirmation, or it's a confirmation plus a further release. So what's the story? Like any transition period, the interim period is always one of great difficulty. Well, what about humanity today? We stand between two ages, and we are in an overlap period, aren't we? What are we between? Piscean energy and Aquarian energy. And we are really demonstrating neither one nor the other. or both, there are great streams of Piscean energy still running around, trying to reassert themselves. There are also Aquarian tendencies, as we see certainly in the scientific field and in the social experimental field. And there's a big flux and disturbance, vortex created by the conflict of these forces. The energies being registered, made active, and finally used are steadily increasing in number and potency at each initiation. So the higher the initiation we have, the more the new energies exist. There are a great number of energies that the higher initiate has to handle all at the same time. These impacts upon the rays of the soul and the personality rays of the initiate, these impact, shouldn't it be? These, well, okay. Anyway, these impacts upon the rays of the soul and the personality rays of the initiate and on the subsidiary vehicles through which he works in the three worlds and upon their individual conditioning rays produce at first tremendous difficulties. So here we have all of our vehicles and all of these rays coming in, making their impact, and all the astrological energies and all the social currents and the transitional energies of the age and so forth. It's a lot to handle. And we're in the middle of that right now, with many people making transition rapidly now from one initiation to another because of the opportunity of the times. These the initiate must master, and the problems involved he must solve. He thereby becomes eventually a master, and the process, as it goes forward from initiation to initiation, becomes, after the third initiation, the transfiguration, less hard and distressing. That's kind of interesting. We sometimes look forward to the fourth degree as if it's really, really difficult, and he does say that it's really, really difficult, but is not as difficult, is mastering the manifold energies. Remember what he says, between the third and the fourth degree, the amount of knowledge that you pick up is tremendous. It's a huge influx of knowledge. Well, here's the point. The synthesis petals are really unfolding at that time. So you can handle all of that complexity. You may have to go through difficult situations, but at least the mastery of the multiple energies is not as difficult, he is saying. So the reason for this, says DK, is he is increasingly master of his own individual situation, and he is not so vulnerable. He has a much stronger center. He's much more flexible, much more receptive, and synthetic. He is, however, occultly involved in the difficulties and the problems of the group and of that totality of groups we call humanity. So this is very important. What we have here is the idea that while the personal situation simplifies for the initiate of higher degree, his outer problem increases because he has to be of assistance in the totality of problems we call, humanity, or the group problems. Many things are thrown at him there. At least he has a simplification in his own individual life. And we oftentimes see this, you know. We don't exactly say to ourselves, I wonder what personal problems the Dalai Lama is suffering from now. You know, he certainly has an up and down personality, doesn't he? We don't say that because he's involved in helping to solve the problems of the larger group and of humanity. He has simplified his own personal issue. So have people like Bishop Tutu, I'm sure, who was involved, you know, in making that tremendous transition for the South African people. Okay, anyway, this is all going on between the first and second degree. The initiatory process between the first and second initiations is for me the worst time of distress, difficulty, realization of problems, and constant efforts to clear himself. Shall we take a moment and meditate on self-pity? Well, this is the moment, you know. Many of us are passing through this stress, difficulty, What's the latest problem? I remember I had a kind of a boyfriend at the age of 17. He and I were both going to be psychiatrists. Well, he turned out to be a psychiatrist. I missed the boat on that. But then I have you. Okay, so woo, I have me too. So anyway, our telephone conversations would always be like this. He'd ring me, and the first thing I'd hear him say is, "Mike, I'm depressed." Okay, and then we got into the conversation. Then I'd call him, "Bob, I'm depressed," and we would go on and kind of teenage years and all those things you had to handle. But I'm thinking about this kind of situation where everything seems distressing. There are so many problems, and you can't get your consciousness clear. I guess it's the adolescent period. I met him actually again, 5 years ago. I had heard reports that he was dead, so I called up to find out. And he said, "No, I'm very much alive. I'm healthy as a horse." So we met for tea. And he was a successful psychiatrist, in child psychiatry or something like that. And I was telling him about the esoteric life, and we were having a good conversation 40 years later. But I still remember, I guess, if you want to be a good psychiatrist, you have to go through something first. So anyway, this effort to clear oneself, to which the disciple at any time is subjected. The phrase stating that the objective of the initiate is to clear himself is perhaps the most arresting and illuminating of all possible definitions of the task to be undertaken. So maybe we should pause and look at that phrase and repeat that. We may not finish the second initiation today, folks. Well, remember, it's a very long time between the first and second initiation. It might take 6 months. Okay. The phrase stating that the objective of the initiate is to clear himself is perhaps the most arresting and illuminating of all possible definitions of the task to be undertaken, especially in this time. So let's just pause for a moment and let's think meditatively about this process of clearing oneself and how you go about it, how one could. Here we are talking about the second degree and clearing oneself, and there's a kind of an obvious contrast in our studies, is there not, between the clear, cold light we've been studying and this issue occurring at an earlier time involving clearing oneself. This is obviously a first or preliminary task occurring before the second degree, and the clear cold light is operating after the third degree. We see that the initiate would have come a long way in ridding himself of all of these personal veils to the clear cold light. The storm, you have hot weather system and cold weather system, they come together. The storm aroused by his emotional nature, the dark clouds and mists in which he constantly walks, and which has created throughout the entire cycle of incarnated living, he has created this throughout the entire cycle of incarnated living, have all to be cleared away in order that the initiate can say that for him, the astral plane no longer exists. That's kind of interesting, because that field of matter we call the astral plane does have to exist so that there can be continuity between the mental atoms and the etheric atoms. But what we call the astral condition, normally the astral plane, no longer exists. It turns out to be a field for the reflection of Buddhic or love energy, which is very different from all of these storms, mists, dark clouds, and so forth. They all have to be cleared away and shown to be unnecessary, arising from causes which can be dispensed with. I suppose when you have a first-ray astral body, this is a good time to take care of some of this clearing. You know how Pluto manages to get rid of things, get things out of your system? If you have a Scorpio moon, anyone have a Scorpio moon? Scorpio moon or a first-ray astral body, it could clear away many of these darker aspects. First-ray astral body is therapeutic and cathartic, and is not found in anybody but disciples. You have to be on the path to have one of those, and you have to be at the point where you are trying to clear your nature. The other problem with the first-ray astral body, of course, is that you might just sit on it. You might suppress it. You might not let it out. But then, of course, later come the eruptions. And all that remains of, would you? Or you become ill. Or you become ill. Yes, suppression. And that's one of the dangers of our coming period of Saturn in Scorpio. Some people will face their dweller, or whatever they can see of it, and other people will just sit on the emotions. So I would say that proportionally, during such a period of 2.5 years, there would be a larger share of colon obstructions than during other 2.5-year periods, and associated blockages that come with suppression. But all of that has to be worked out statistically one day. We're in certain time periods, and we have the numbers of what human beings are suffering from and with, and we compare it to the astrology of the period. So that all that remains of that potent aspect, ancient and potent aspect of his being, is aspiration, a sensitive response to all forms of divine life, and a form through which the lowest aspect of divine love, goodwill, can flow without impediment. Now, here is your answer. If people have sometimes asked you, what does it mean that the astral plane disappears? DK has just given us his explanation of what it means for the astral plane to disappear. Something remains. Okay, so, and he's told us what remains. If the astral plane disappears, then these 3 things remain: sensitivity, aspiration, and goodwill. That is what is expressed through the astral body once we say there is no more astral plane for us. So it's really getting rid of all of these sort of false forms, false astral forms, inharmonious astral forms. We are left with the possibility of uplifting, goodwill, sensitive energy. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm happy to read it, because it's a problematic solution. What do you mean the astral body disappears? And this is what he means by that. It doesn't mean that a whole level of nature ruled by Lord Varuna, in the case of the planetary logos, disappears. What's Lord Varuna going to do? He needs an astral plane to rule. He's a Rajadeva Lord. So, what happens is a much more wholesome, Buddhically reflective astral plane appears, an astral condition. And this is the kind of thing we want following the second initiation, that there will be sensitivity, aspiration, and goodwill. That's what we want from our astral body after the second initiation. And if we have Jupiter, Venus, and Neptune as the rulers of the second initiation, we're liable to get these things, aren't we? Because they are planets of all of these things. Before that happens, of course, there's an awful lot of Mars and a lot of storms that happen. From the larger point of view, is this struggle to clear the world atmosphere, and we are in it right now, wouldn't you say, which confronts humanity, which will confront humanity after the first initiation so close at hand today. We look at the glamorous astral condition in the world emotional body at the moment and say, this is terrible, but our first task is to work on the ethers, to make sure that all of this horrible stuff does not precipitate actually into our physical circumstances so we can't even live. At least if the ethers are clear, we can carry on physical plane life. And then we can use Vulcan and Taurus to stand with massed intent, with spiritual will and illumination, and clear the world astral plane. This will still be some hundreds of years away, I suspect. Okay, so we haven't taken the first initiation as humanity yet, and so maybe the astral plane is somewhat going to remain somewhat the way it is, and we will not have the sun shine upon the astral plane yet. You will see, therefore, why the Christ must come at this time, for he is the one who presides at the first and second initiations, and it is his coming. Well, here it is. And it is his coming which will indicate that humanity has taken the first initiation. There it is. There's the statement. When the Christ comes, it will indicate, it will show that humanity has taken the first initiation. So he says here, so close at hand today. This must mean that the first initiation, with all of the Vulcan and Pluto upsets before it, is right upon us right now. I would say within 100 years, it's very likely that humanity will have taken this first initiation. Although we don't know, some people say Christ is here. Well, he is here. He has a Maya Varupa is here. But they say, oh, he lives in London and he's from Pakistan. It's just nonsense again. So go find him. The press should go find him and interview him so we'll all know that the Christ is here. Oh well, we can believe anything, right? We believe what we want to believe. So when the Christ comes, it will indicate that the first initiation is taken. We have to clear the atmosphere of the earth. The Christ must come. It is time for this clearing. And it is his coming which will indicate humanity has taken the first initiation and will confirm and consolidate the work done, and which will inaugurate the world cycle and period in which the task of reorganizing the emotional and psychic life of humanity will take place. So if you were going to look for the planets and signs involved in this, you would say, I think, Uranus and the seventh ray and the Aquarian energy. Uranus and the seventh ray in the water signs. Uranus and the seventh ray in the water signs. All right, in other words, reorganizing the emotional and psychic life. We will not respond anymore the way we used to respond in an irrational way. There will be new patterns of emotional response which will be much more fitting with the light. This period will release the energy of goodwill and thus automatically bring about right human relations. And he is saying here, goodwill released will automatically bring right human relations. Yes? Christ is taking the seventh after the age of Aquarius, or at the end, toward the end. That's the implication that I get. He will do his work in the Aquarian age. Of course, I'll tell you what. Yes, that's another 7. And I'll tell you what, there is a chapter or a statement about what happens at the Festival of Goodwill. And I don't want to go looking for the reference right now, but it makes it look like at the Festival of Goodwill, the love of God is released to such a high extent that a Son of God like the Christ takes his highest inspiration from it and achieves a high initiation at it. Now, the very interesting thing is, what ray rules the seventh initiation? Just off the top of your head. Because a ray does rule that initiation. And of course, I'm kind of, implying it by what I said about the Christ, taking his, well, maybe I can find it. I just don't know. But it's an amazing statement, and it makes you think that the Christ has taken another phase of the seventh initiation in the June full moon of 1943. So 1943 Gemini, well, we'll see. Here it is. Oh, I found it. Well, every once in a while it happens. At the time of the June full moon each year, the love of God, the spiritual essence of solar fire, reaches its highest point of expression. This it achieves through the instrumentality of the hierarchy, that great group of souls which has ever been the custodian of the principle of light, of enlightened love, and which always down the ages focuses its attention upon the race of men when the spiritual influence is at its height. This it does through one of the great sons of God. Well, it's the Christ at this time, right? The full moon of June of 1943 saw this outpouring of divine love reach its highest expression for all time. And at the point of attainment, which is, for that particular Son of God, his highest also. Such is the law. When an embodied Christ in time and space reaches his goal of achievement, recognition of this comes to him at the time of the June full moon, for in that sign of Gemini, the complete victory of life over form and of spirit over matter is consummated and celebrated. This, in short, the second ray, is the ray that controls the seventh initiation. Spirit is on the first plane, logoic, matter is on the bottom. These are the poles of Gemini from the spirit-matter perspective. This particular phrase or sentence, or a combination of them, indicates something additional about the Christ's relationship to the seventh initiation, in my view. He's not, we're told that the seventh initiation lies ahead of him, but it seems to be taken in different parts. And there's some kind of stupendous attainment along the second ray line that happened at this time for the Christ, the Gemini full moon of 1943. Do you understand why I think the way I think on this? Does it make sense to you? And at the point, look at it, and at the point of attainment, which is for that particular Son of God, his highest also. And he has been working on the seventh initiation for 2,000 years. The seventh initiation is taken on the logoic plane. On the logoic plane, plus Gemini, seventh initiation. This is the location of the Christ, the greatest outpouring of love, which is the ray, which is used at the seventh initiation. There's a lot of things that come together in this particular period. So there is also a statement that the Christ and the Buddha will pass before the one initiator and will move on to greater heights and other places. So because that is the case, and we know the Christ will stay with us for the entire Aquarian age, we have to assume that the Buddha and the Christ will stand before the initiator toward the end of the Aquarian age, because the Christ is due to be the world's Savior for 5,000 years, which is very unusual. It's usually just 2,500 years. So if you put those ideas together, his 5,000-year saviorship and the fact that he will stand before the initiator with the Buddha, it has to be later in the Aquarian age. So remember when DK just said this morning that it doesn't do us much good to study the seventh initiation, which lies before the Christ? The book is written more or less at the same time. These books are written in the early 40s, or early and middle 40s, unless suddenly it was possible for the Christ to take the seventh initiation. Anyway, I feel this is part of the process of taking the seventh initiation, this particular paragraph. Okay. So anyway, the Christ will come, humanity will have taken the first degree, and under the seventh ray, the emotional life will be reorganized. It just makes sense, doesn't it? Everything is the seventh ray and Uranus. So reorganization is what happens to our emotional bodies. What would a reorganized emotional body look like? Have you ever seen Leadbeater's drawings of emotional bodies as he perceives them? They're kind of interesting and oftentimes pretty messy. They're filled with things, What? We have drawings. We have drawings of this. I could find it, but I'm not going to go looking. Suffice it to say, they are often very turbulent. Yeah, lots of things are in there. And then when you look at the Rainbow Bridge book, those people who were doing this kind of clearing with the soul point and all of that, there's all kinds of things in there that don't look like they belong. It's like we have a whole bunch of monsters in our emotional body, and they have to be cleared out. Well, I think, the second ray, the seventh ray, is called the ray of ritualistic decency. That's an interesting name, the ray of ritualistic decency. And it does cleanse and purify and put into order whatever field it touches, including the emotional field with which it does not have a whole lot of rapport. It's not on the 246 line. But I think there will be a much more polite, considerate, appropriate emotional response after the seventh ray gets finished with its work. Right now, you don't know what to expect. As regards humanity as a whole, polarized as it is in the emotional nature, the effect of the sixth ray is potent in the extreme. This we know. Its energy has been playing upon men ever since it came into incarnation, and we're not told when that is, but it's been, he said even Buddhism, you would think Buddhism was really upon the second ray. He says it's more likely upon the sixth ray, in the second sub-cycle of the sixth ray. And he talks about Buddhism, and Buddhism is 2,500 years ago. So how long has this sixth ray been in incarnation? It came into, its energy has been playing upon men ever since it came into incarnation, and the last 150 years have seen that potency become extremely effective. Now, let's say this thing is written, let's say 1945. I don't know, maybe 1941, something like that. Let's just make it easy and say 1940. This means that he's talking about ever since 1790 or 1795. And a big hint is given here, 1790 or 1795, something like that, 85, 95. Stephen Pugh is very sharp on these things, and he believes that the sixth ray cycles are all generated on multiples of the number 1,5, which, by the way, adds up to 6, interestingly enough. 15, 150, 1,500, 15,000, 150,000, blah, blah, blah. Notice this is the second time in the books that he mentions the period 150 in connection with the sixth ray. What he does in esoteric psychology is he tries to show you ray cycles in history, and he breaks the last 2,000 years into 150-year cycles, sub-cycles of the sixth ray. So this, it seems quite obvious in a way that this number 15 is connected with the sixth ray, and now he's doing it again. So let's just say that when this book was written in 1940, 45, whatever, the 150 years previous to it, the sixth ray has been extremely potent, he says. Two factors have enhanced this effect. Number one, the sixth ray. Why is he talking about the sixth ray? Because it's the ray that controls the second initiation. And a lot of people who are taking that initiation have to have that ray potent in some way. The sixth ray of idealism or of devotion is the ray which normally governs the astral plane, controlling its phenomena and coloring its glamour. Okay. Number two, the stream of energy coming into our planetary life from the constellation Pisces, which by the way is a sixth ray constellation, has for 2,000 years conditioned human experience and is peculiarly fitted to blend with and complement this sixth ray energy and to produce exactly the situation which is today governing world affairs. So there's a very strong connection between the sixth ray and Pisces. Let's make sure about our dates. When will there be no more Piscean energy? Yes, it will fade out. He tells us it will disappear completely in the 21st century. So we could assume when, might be sooner, but it will definitely have to be later. And when are we rid of the sixth ray in its present cycle? Yeah, that's it. 2130 roughly, because when he was writing the esoteric psychology book, number one, in the early 1930s, he said it will be out of incarnation in 200 years. So, you know, right around there. So the Piscean energy will go fairly soon, and the sixth ray energy will be with us, well, not more than a century and a little more. So we're definitely, you know, seeing the light of day, but there's plenty of danger still because the world atmosphere has not yet been cleared. Okay, the united activity of these two great streams of cosmic energy, playing upon and through the third planetary center, humanity, has created the unique condition in which the race of men can stand before the planetary initiator, the Christ, and under the focused stimulation of the hierarchy, pass through the appropriate initiation. Isn't that something? You know, we normally think about these two energies, Pisces and the sixth ray, as undesirables because they're causing so much conflict. Are valuable in that they have given to humanity the opportunity to stand before the Christ as the initiator. So that is, I think, you know, the purpose of the combination of these things. It has produced that kind of uplifting idealism, and here is exactly one of the reasons. Pisces is the sign which facilitates the transition from the, what am I going to say, from the, okay, I can't even get this. Okay, it should be mutable cross to the fixed cross. And when does the initiation begin? When do you enter the kingdom of God? First initiation. When do you change crosses? First initiation. So the sixth ray and Pisces have made it possible to make the transition off the mutable cross where ordinary humanity is living as personalities onto the fixed cross and take initiation. So this is, for me, I mean, I'm just somehow really realizing how important the combination is between these two energies. And, you know, having a new respect for what they've done. The sixth ray of idealism and devotion, and the energy coming from the constellation Pisces, making initiation possible. Why do you think that would be? What is it about those two energies together that would make initiation possible? What do you think? What's the essence? What does the sixth ray do? What is the word of power for the sixth ray? Remember, you know, like I see the greatest light and all that. What is the word of power for the sixth ray? Well, three minds unite is the fifth ray. This sixth ray it involves light. The highest light controls, right? The highest light controls. So, this gives an orientation towards that which is normally not considered of the world. So Christ says to his disciples, you must be in the world but not of the world. In order to become an initiate, part of you has to leave this world and stand as an objective observer of a lower sphere. You have to go into the causal body and meet the Christ in the causal body and there be initiated. You have to have an orientation away from materialism. Can this help the sixth ray and Pisces in the higher expression of these two energies? What about Pisces? Does it give any release? Does Pisces allow you to, as it were, escape into a higher world? Well, it depends on, you see, here's the thing about Pisces. You know, Pisces has an expression of the second ray and the sixth ray, correct? Those are the two rays that go through it. These are subjective rays of meditation and of life. They are not rays of form. The sixth ray is not a ray of form. As a matter of fact, it's called the hater of forms. It gives that subjective, idealistic attitude which allows you to aspire towards a point of focus which is not on the physical plane at first. So it sets up the whole initiatory process, and especially it would be very good for the second initiation. You see, look, when you tell people you're thinking about taking initiation, you know, the average person will really wonder what you're talking about. But then you can assure them that it happens on the higher mental plane, and then everything they thought about you, they'll know was true. Okay. See, so in other words, the subtle worlds, these initiations are taken in the subtle worlds. Would you say that the sixth ray and Pisces can orient us towards the subtle worlds? Wouldn't you say so? Yeah. Okay, as a matter of fact, you know, many sixth ray Pisces people, they have a very unrealistic attitude. You know, they're not grounded. But you don't have to be grounded all the time. I mean, you know, there is a reason first to understand the subjectivity and later bring it into groundedness. So anyway, I'm finding this very interesting to reread this. It's almost as if I've never read it, but now I understand. So the united activity of these two great streams of cosmic energy have made it possible for the race of men to stand before the planetary initiator, the Christ. Christ must come. The first two initiations must be taken. The world atmosphere must be cleared. And we've been set up so this can happen. And now in comes the seventh ray energy, which makes it real. Happens right here in the physical brain. It should be remembered that the masses of men can and will take the first initiation, but that a very large group of aspirants, far larger than is realized, will pass through the experience of the second initiation. Well, look, he said earlier, we read it, it was a mass initiation, first degree. He said thousands, and then what did he say yesterday when we were studying economic reform? These initiates will be with us in their millions by 2025. So that's why he calls the first initiation a mass initiation. And maybe humanity will, in a way, be overshadowed by the Spirit of the Christ, and who knows exactly how that initiation will be taken. But it will be taken also in the temples of initiation when they are built after Master R has built them. Well, you know, the coming seventh ray avatar, I think, is pretty much Master R. He's described in Esoteric Psychology 2 as having neither the complete love of the Christ nor the complete wisdom of the Buddha, but plenty of both and tremendous manifesting power. It sounds like Master R. So he has to set that whole reappearance of the mysteries thing and make sure that it gets manifested. So a much larger group than we think of will pass through the experience of the second initiation, and he calls it the purifying baptism. Now, who are these people? And here are some descriptions. They are people who express the essential qualities of ideological recognition, devoted adherence to truth as sensed, profound reaction to the physical disciplines, as Mars, after all, does rule the physical body, imposed since they participated in the first initiation many lives earlier, and a growing responsiveness to the aspirational aspect of the astral body. So let's take a look here. Who are these second-degree initiates? Who are second-degree initiates? Second-degree initiates. And here we have them. And do we recognize anything here of people we know or ourselves? These are people who express the essential qualities of ideological recognition. In other words, they respond to ideals and even to ideas, and something that is above just the mundane earthly plane. They are devoted to truth, truth as they understand it, as sensed. They also really want to do the right thing physically, you know, quite militant in their approach to the physical disciplines, yoga, vegetarianism, whatever it happens to be, and a growing responsiveness to aspiration. They are full of aspiration. This aspiration is occupied with reaching out towards contact with and expression of the mental principle. So, by the time you are a second degree initiate, you have to have what is called, oh, wait a second, just disappeared. You have to have spiritual intelligence and mental illumination. Those are the two mental conditions which should accompany the second degree. Not only is the heart involved in the second degree, just like it was in the first, but the throat center is involved in the second degree. We learn in Initiation Human Solar. So, he says, spiritual instinct, first degree. Spiritual intelligence and mental illumination, second degree. Intuitive instinct, third degree. You may remember that passage, but I find it for you anyway, because it is worth seeing, and then one can believe it, at least that it's written. Spiritual instinct, the lowest aspect of the intuition, indicates readiness for the first initiation. The illumined mind and spiritual intelligence are the definite sign that a man can take the second initiation, whilst spiritual perception or intuitive instinct signifies preparation for the transfiguration or the third initiation. We have to be possessed of these qualities in order to take these initiations. So certainly, you know, you find that these groups under the Tibetan are working a lot with the illumined mind and developing spiritual intelligence. That's just like obvious when you see what he demands of us in our studies. And then we would have to go further and begin to perceive the triad and begin to have the flashes of real intuition. This indicates the readiness for the third degree. So this is found in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, page 267, a very important description of the sort of 1, 2, 3 of the three initiations. So what do these people have? They have ideology, truth, discipline, and aspiration. Let's just, an aspiration towards the mind. So they have ideology, truth, discipline, and aspiration towards the mind. They have all that. Well, you know, everything, there's many lives here, and everything depends on the other rays that are accompanying it in the astrological science. You know, he says we don't want a bunch of unbalanced fanatics as our associates. So obviously the sixth ray has its different types of orientations. It can orient you towards materiality or spirituality. Devotion can be in any of these, towards any of these areas. But suffice it to say, it is a ray which is much needed for this particular initiation and for the battle with glamour as well. When you look at DK's glamour group, some of whom actually succumbed to glamour, every one of them had a powerful sixth ray in their equipment, which put them en rapport with the astral plane so they could, in fact, work in that way. But DK also did say the sixth ray type is very much in need of common sense. So when you combine the fifth ray as a balancing factor with the sixth ray, which often, you see, the fifth ray comes in order to help the mystic make the transition towards the occultist, then you have a grounding situation. And he also says that the sixth ray type will have a seventh ray personality for quite a number of lives in order to bring down the expression. So the soul has its method of achieving balance here. But, you know, for many sixth ray types, if they didn't have the other energies, it would be up, up, and away, you know. So they would be interested in spiritual aspiration, and they would actually die of their aspiration. DK says many in the old monastic days, they died of aspiration. They basically wanted out of here so much with their aspiration that they somehow cut the thread of livingness to the etheric body, which is very interesting. And to another man, he said, look, you used to spend so much time on the astral plane when you were a monk, you have to correct that now. By the way, this was a man who was a seventh ray, first ray soul and seventh ray personality. But his legacy from the past was so sixth ray that he had to correct his astralism. So evolution is complicated, you know, it's not just cut and dried. All right, so here is what he has. He has all these things: ideology, truth, discipline, aspiration towards the mind. This particular group in the human family are called the Kama monastic initiates, just as those taking the first initiation are the physico-etheric initiates. Isn't that interesting? This is a name for the type of initiates which these people are. Kama monastic or physico-etheric. I think very interesting. I wonder what he would call the third degree types. It would not be Kama monastic. He would call them intuitive mental, something like that, you know, because that's what they have to have. Spiritual perception or intuitive instinct. What is spiritual perception? For the third degree type, what is spiritual perception? What do you think he means? Intuitive. Well, this is intuitive instinct. He has to have, meaning he starts toward the intuition. But remember, the intuition does not come into full expression till the fourth degree, and he's learning it after the third degree. And before the third degree, he has intuitive instinct. But spiritual perception, I believe it is this. If I'm going to put it in terms of the planes, I believe that spiritual perception is this: that he is capable of seeing with the revelations of the first three subplanes of the higher mental plane, which would be spiritual discernment, response to group vibration, and spiritual telepathy. That he begins to see as if he is in the causal body. I believe that's what spiritual perception really is. Causal perception, I would say. It makes sense to me anyway. And I would, I'll just put it down in terms of, oh, see, we have a protest going on here. Okay. I have to make promises to my computer. Like I promised to clean you or something like that. Because I tried that the other night and it turned out it didn't need the kind of cleaning I thought at all. So I just figure it's just being ornery. Rebellious, that is. Okay, so I call this causal perception. And remember that a third degree initiate can focus consciousness in the causal body at will. It is the activity of this sixth ray which is brought out into the light of day, the growing ideological tendencies of mankind. If you look at the United States today, there is a completely polarized and divided situation with its Gemini personality. Two types of idealists are ranged opposed to each other. They are called red and blue. They are really, the reds are it's not like Russian reds, it's like Mars reds, sixth ray. They are the Republican Party, known as, at this present time, the party of the rich, of independence and of non-social interaction. Socialism is a dirty word. The other is the party of the blue. They are Jupiter. They represent more the second ray soul of the nation, but they are the sixth ray expression of the second ray soul. So these two fanatical types, the reds and the blues, are completely polarized according to the split which Gemini personality of the country represents. And it's going to be a gruesome battle the next 4 or 5 months before the election. This is the ideological tendency of mankind. There are the fascists, the Nazis, the communists, the socialists, the Democrats, the monarchists, just the oligarchists, the one after another, parties. And the word part is in parties. And it means they just see a part of the picture. This is what they represent. In France, we have 3 parties, sort of and there's just been an election. The socialists won compared to who was the president, Sarkozy, whatever he represented. Then Marie Le Pen was representing the far right. There are all of these orientations, and none of them see the whole picture. DK calls for the formation of an entirely new party of humanity, which comes out of the new group of world servers and which sees inclusively using the fourth ray so that there is no dangerous tendency to separate the past from the future. Anyway, we have a huge ideological tendency in humanity. It's the result of the sixth ray. These world ideologies, of which there are many, present in the world today, are created by a triple reaction to the 2 streams of energy mentioned above. Now, the 2 streams of energy mentioned above, I suppose, were Pisces and the sixth ray. I guess. Is that what he meant? 2 streams of energy mentioned above? I think so. Yeah, here we go. 6-ray and the stream of energy, which is coming in from Pisces. So we're growing out of that, but let's just say the reaction, um, a triple reaction to the two streams. The unfoldment of the mental principle. You can't be an ideologue unless you do some thinking. The unfoldment of the mental principle during the Aryan age has forced desire into the form of great mass concepts. So rather than just have random desires, we have certain concepts prevalent in the mass mind which focus or define that desire. These unitedly are bringing the mass tendency towards mental unfoldment. So maybe it's not a bad thing from that perspective to have these defining parties. Point 2, what are we looking at here? These world ideologies are created by a triple reaction to two streams. Okay, so the triple reaction, the unfoldment of the mental principle, that's the first thing. The next thing is the steady growing soul influence, working like a leaven on the astral plane, has lifted karma or desire out of its purely selfish, purely self-centered focus and brought in a new and hitherto unexpressed group emotional consciousness. So responding to Pisces, responding to the 6-ray, we have soul influence producing group emotional consciousness. This leads to the fused emotional nature of men into great ideological mass expressions, but they really get invested emotionally in their party. Have you seen some of these political operatives following their party? How over the top, it's almost like going to a soccer game. You know, when you go to a convention, it's like cheering for the teams, you know. Great ideological mass expression, still selfish, expressed and impulsed as yet by emotional excess, but indicating new and better goals. This is interesting. These goals will assume clearer and more desirable outlines when the second initiation is undergone by the world aspirant. In other words, when humanity, by and large, has taken the second degree, this emotional mass consciousness will be more tame, less selfish, less excessive, and it will begin to take the form that we find in the second formula. Remember our second formula? How do we describe the second formula in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2? We are given something that tells us what the second formula is. There are several pictures. Do you remember them? The pictures of the flag. Do you remember the flag? It has a circle and all these lines going out of it. And then some of them a smaller circle, and some is a rectangle, and some is a square. He says this represents the idealism of all the peoples towards that symbol, the flag, which orients their aspiration. So actually, and that has to do with the second initiation, that particular formula. So this idealism may not be bad, it's selfish at the moment, but it can be more purely altruistic. It's on its way. The third reaction, the influence generated by the Shambhala energy, which has, for the first time, made direct contact with humanity, well, ever since 1825, is producing emotional vortex, Shambhala hitting the emotional body, in which the old ideals and institutions are seen divorced from their hitherto controlling glamours, thus permitting the new and better ideologies to emerge, new and better ideologies emerging under the Shambhalic influence. So we have three things that are happening in response to the Pisces and 6-ray energy. The mind principle is unfolding, the soul principle is active, the Shambhala principle is impacting. So this is going on, you know, he's talking about the reaction of humanity to all of this. All of these factors are responsible for the world situation at this time. Great ideologies, potent groupings of workers and thinkers dedicated, there's the word, that's the first one, dedicated to the changing of the old order, and massed efforts to end separativeness are all present simultaneously, many conflicting currents. The essential etheric world unity of which the telephone, the radio, the airplane, and now he would certainly say the internet, is the tangible expression, is swinging vast groups of men everywhere into united emotional activity. This is all under the sixth ray. Very interesting. United emotional activity. Everybody desiring, ideally desiring the same vision and objective. In groups, of course, different groups. Thus creating those preliminary testings which ever precede initiation, and by means of which those capable of taking the second initiation are today passing. So maybe in some of these idealistic groups, we find candidates for the second degree. There was a man at the conference. He's a Scorpio man, wonderful man. Wow. We had, if you get a chance to see it, on Saturday, on the last day, we had 2 lectures from people who were in the peace process. One man was a Leo with, I think, Scorpio rising, and the other man was a Scorpio with a lot of Libra, I think. They gave 2 completely different demonstrations of the sixth ray, connected, of course, with their astrological signs. One was the kind of sixth ray where the sixth ray was just so exteriorized you could feel yourself almost lifting off the seats because he had such an up energy, you know. He was talking about all of his heroes and the people who had made great strides in peace and the bravery and the courage and all that they had expressed. It was just like, I thought I was watching a preacher, except, of course, he was in the field of peace, and he was wonderful. Then the other man, totally controlled. I think he has Scorpio rising, you know, just things are under control. Talking so slowly, you know. And the intensity that he generated towards the ideal of peace was just, you know, we were totally fascinated by it. He was like, and at one point, you know, I've seen this sixth ray pattern before. I went to Toronto in 2000, and they had a conference there, very good conference. They had Matthew Fox, who is some sort of, he's a minister who somehow has a big social mission. He starts out real quietly, real slowly, you know, in his delivery. About 15 minutes into his talk, he's so wound up that the whole room is just lifting off the chairs. This slow start and cranking up and getting more and more intense. I saw the same thing happen with this man. He's a wonderful man, just a fascinating speaker. And you will see him. He has a great intensity. He spoke utterly slowly. Almost you have to wait for every word. But then, all of a sudden, it's as if he was overshadowed by one of the Old Testament prophets. And he starts speaking as a prophet. And when he spoke as a prophet, his rhythm changed entirely, and he began to predict all these things and speak in biblical terms, and it was just like he was being overshadowed by some great sixth-ray force, and then it went back into this slow, coiled intensity. So I was looking at the method of speech of people, and is so revealing of the rays. But I must say that what is important also is what accompanies the ray in terms of astrology. You'll get all the modifications accordingly. So when we invite the new group of world servers types to come to our conferences, and they don't speak about occultism. They speak about out there in the field what we're doing, right? We get some real sixth-ray types. There's something about that, you know, that he's been talking about here between, let's say, the first and second initiation, where the idealism is very, very strong, and they are in these groups that have a united emotional activity and which have great objectives, and they inspire us all with real action. You know how it is sometimes to be a student of esotericism? You just study, and you study, and you study, you know. You meditate some, and then you study. You know, you do all those things, and these people are out there where the bullets are flying, you know, and the bombs are dropping, and they're right in the middle of it all, and their idealism is what's keeping them there. And it's really inspiring to listen to. Because, the scholar doesn't necessarily like to take up a rifle and be on the front line. So they're a very necessary balance. And so, Anne, you've been to a number of conferences, so you know some of these people and how they do inspire the group. They were speakers. Well, I would have to look, obviously, the planet of elocution and oratory is Mercury. But we're also told that the sixth ray makes the great orators, like Churchill, and Hitler and people like that who had the power to command through the voice. So I haven't studied their chart enough in that respect to know where Mercury was. But I'll tell you what, the ideas may have been expressed beautifully, but there was a lot more than Mercury. Neptune, Mars, I'll tell you. You know how the second ray is not a ray of intensity. It's a ray of relaxation, of permission, where you allow people to be as they are. And when you're listening to the sixth ray types, it's just like a coiled spring sometimes. I was just amazed at the different dynamics. So I'll look it up for you if I can find, okay? Okay, we're almost there. We're just going to give you 10 more minutes on this before we take our break. I cannot here enlarge upon the various ideologies which are presenting themselves to the world of men, impulsed by the hierarchy, precipitated into human consciousness from the mental plane, by the new group of world servers, because that's where the new group must work, implemented by the energy of the sixth ray, by the dominant Piscean energy, and by the organizing energy of the seventh ray, and responded to emotionally by the masses of men focused on the astral plane. What a sentence. Another one of the Tibetan's synthetic sentences. He's not going to go into all that. He just summarized everything for us in one sentence. To all intelligent observers, this ideological situation is clear. It is needed and preliminary stage to the creation of a new world order. Ideology is needed, preliminary to the creation of a new world order. And now we have many movements out there which are not necessarily good, although they are ideological. Now, let's just say, I think with Nazism, it was like a religion. There was a tremendous sixth ray involved in it. And now we have anti-democratic movements with a tremendous sixth ray. Like God hates democracy, that kind of thing, if I can just put it in the crudest terms. So we have a real cross-current of ideologies, but out of this, a new world order will come. It provides a point of crisis and a required point of tension, which will enable those aspirants who are ready today in their thousands, here's another number for you, in their thousands, to pass through the experience of the second initiation and to undergo the purification of the fluid emotional nature in the baptism initiation. Remember, the baptism has two ways of being taken. It's water, and water is followed by fire. So there's the watery baptism and the fiery baptism. John the Baptist baptizes with water, and the Christ baptizes with fire. Okay. Through this experience, the Kama-monastic aspirant will be in a positive and spiritual condition to bring about on the astral plane those fundamental changes, rearrangements, readjustments, which will bring that level of planetary consciousness into line with the immediate divine purpose. It's not yet. In other words, on the astral plane, there is not yet an alignment with the purpose of manifesting God on earth. But if these initiates do their job, we will all begin to desire, in other words, the masses will begin to desire the manifestation of kingdom of God. Right now it's just competing, and the way it is now, there's no kingdom of God in it. It's just crazy. People have these various visions. but there could be the right orientation. In other words, when I look at what Master Jesus has to do, I think it's to inspire a unitive idealism in all men. And look at this terrible problem he has between the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians. It's one of those old things that has to be solved. He needs to inspire a common idealism among all those religious adherents. The work of the six-ray energy, the result of a long cycle of Piscean energy and the impact of the incoming Aquarian energy, will bring about a potent transformation in the watery realm of the astral plane. That's a very good promise. And I wonder if it's the Algaean stables work in a way, because Hercules cleaned the Algaean stables on all levels. The symbol of that plane has ever been water, fluid, stormy, reflecting all impressions, the source of mist and fog, yet essential to human living. The Piscean age, now in process of passing away, is also closely related to this plane and to the symbol of water. It fixed in the human consciousness the realization that men are fishes, immersed in the sea of emotions. Well, you know, a lot of people drive around with a bumper sticker on their car where you see a fish. You see that? Or maybe it's just in our six-ray country. You here too? Okay. It means I'm a Christian, you know, and Christ said we should be fishers of men, so, you know, I'm preaching the gospel by putting this fish on my car. Do you see some fishes? Even in Denmark. Okay. And then they have that Greek thing with ichthyos or something, you know, there's some Greek letters. And I forget what they stand for, but it's something that Christ said, or yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it's like she has fish consciousness. You don't. It can be an outline. It can be a color. Symbol 4. Well, anyway, you know, DK gets into this thing. The soul is the fishes. Okay, enough fish. Enough fish. You know, fishers of men, and the fish goddesses are spawning the souls, and the fish is swimming in the great ocean, not only of the astral plane, but of matter. The soul is the fish. Okay. But let me go on to the other part. Aquarius is also known by the symbol of water. Also, interesting, there's an overlap in those two constellations as you study with Nicholas. For Aquarius is the water carrier. The sixth ray will bring together. It's interesting, the law of service, which you would think would be under Aquarius, is under Pisces. Aquarius is the great server, it's under Pisces. There's some kind of union between those two signs. The sixth ray will bring together all these energies in time and space. Ray energy, Piscean energy, Aquarian energy, and the energy of the astral plane itself. This again produces a vortex of force, which is invocative of mental energy. This is so important, because all of this idealism is reaching out in a way towards the mind. And the mind is the next stage, which has to be understood and think about. You know, you can't take the second initiation unless there is a certain proportion of spiritual intelligence and mental illumination. So this sixth ray must reach out towards the mind. It is a controlling factor which has plunged humanity into a tumultuous awareness of clashing ideologies. That's for sure. Which has precipitated a reflected vortex in the World War, which was all about ideologies, fascism versus democracy, communism in the mix, and which is responsible for the present crisis and point of tension in which humanity finds itself. The critical point of tension will enable groups of aspirants who, having passed through the first initiation, can undergo the baptism experience. Again, a word identified with water. So, don't look for easy times, because it is a point of tension which actually sets up the possibility of initiation. So when things are very, very tough in society, and there seems to be conflict on every side, this is the perfect situation for actually having the energy and the determination to pass through an initiation. Simultaneously, large masses of men will take the first initiation in the house of bread, and in the house of bread stand before the initiator. So what do we need? We need here sharing, first initiation. And we need a right idealism in line with the divine plan, second initiation. This is coming. Now, we have all kinds of divergent idealisms today, things that don't lead towards the divine plan at all, that really lead away from it, but at least they're helping people think. We need some of the synthesis of ideals that are actually oriented towards something useful for the planet, and this has not yet occurred. It must soon occur. We need, well, here's another thing. There is the ideal of the one humanity. And some people are advancing that. There is the ideal that we can all live on this planet together at peace. Many of the peace people are real idealists. When you get a combination of Libra and the sixth ray, you get a peace idealist. And I know a number of people who are like that. All right, he's talking a lot about idealism in relation to the world of men. The coming Christ will therefore initiate two group aspirants within the near future, and in preparation for his coming. That's interesting. Even before he comes, he will initiate these groups so that they can help him in his mission. It is the closer approach of the Christ and of the hierarchy of masters to humanity which is implementing the initiatory energies. That's important. As the Christ gets closer, as the hierarchy gets closer, more initiation is happening, which is crystallizing the ideologies present in human consciousness and fostering, if I may so express it, the latent ideology of the kingdom of God. And that's the one we have to advance. That's the ideology. This is our ideology. The kingdom of God, it dwells within. The kingdom of God is our ideology, and this we promote with the hierarchy and masters and Christ as its exponents. So that's the one ideology which can fuse all the other ideologies. And the ideology of the potential of the human being. I would say that the human potential movement is also an ideology. In other words, you don't have to have God do it for you. You can do it yourself because you have tremendous potential in you. That's another one of those unitive ideologies. It can cut across all the others and give man dignity once again. Okay, now I think this is the place for us to stop, because the way he does this is first to say what the ray does in relation to humanity as a whole, and then he goes to the individual aspirant. This is how we did it yesterday. We split it this way and discussed the individual aspirant after we took our little break. So we are just about halfway through the second initiation. I cannot guarantee that the initiator will appear this afternoon, but we will make pretty good progress. This, of course, you can understand, this initiation is really, really potent at this time, even though the numbers are slightly less, and it concerns people like ourselves more than the first initiation. So this is, the vast majority of aspirants in the world today who are consciously seeking the higher life and the soul. This is the initiation that really concerns them. And because the hierarchy is getting closer, I think this is so promising the initiatory potential is far greater. The pressure towards taking initiatory energies, or excuse me, towards taking initiation through the implementation of initiatory energies, that pressure is so great that the chance to take initiation now is much greater than at any other time in history. That being the case, people should take advantage of the possibilities. Okay, we take a little break. 26th? 26th. Okay. That's Sagittarius, isn't it? Yes. Yes, it is. Well, obviously we have many issues, which I can't really discuss now. But we will all continue our work to make sure that the context in which classes can be given persists. Okay, take a break. Yes, she's obviously an initiate. Who did she work with? Oh, really? Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure there was a parting. There was a parting of the ways. I'm sure.